Thank you guys for joining us today. We are going to be continuing our series of trainings that are geared toward school-based coaches. So if you feel like you don't have the official title of coach, but you're one of those people that helps your school to understand and implement PBIS, then guess what? You're a coach. So anybody that is involved with the PBIS team can consider themselves part of that coaching process. So just to give you a little bit of an update of the chats that have already gone on in this series, they are all recorded and can be found at our website, floridapbis.org, or on our Florida PBIS YouTube channel. So if you aren't already subscribed to our YouTube channel, feel free to head over there and check out what we've got. The chat today is going to be about kind of planning for the summer and thinking about what's going to help us to sustain PBIS for the upcoming school year. So these are the objectives that we hope to cover today. We're going to start thinking about those 10 critical elements that make up PBIS implementation. We're going to explore some key factors that have been identified through research to show a large role in sustaining PBIS. So there's 4 key tips that we're going to sort of focus on today. We'll also look at that added roadblock we have right now to sustainability, which is our shift that we've made to virtual online learning and some of that uncertainty that's presented to us. And then we're going to end on a positive note, sharing some of the lessons that we've learned along the way this year and share some of the recommendations for gearing up for next year. So just to review, anyone that's attended our 3-day training or has experience with PBIS should be familiar with these 10 critical elements. And when combined, these are the things that make for an effective PBIS process. So the one we typically see focused on a lot is the reward system. But as you can see, that's only 1/10 of the critical elements that are really important to driving this process. So just to get to know you guys a little bit and to hear a little bit about what your experience has been just in these past couple of months since we've switched to remote learning, which of these critical elements do you think are going to be most important during the time of remote learning? If we end up having to continue to do this in some form or fashion, what critical elements do you think are going to be important? And then share also how you think these critical elements might look different during this time. So maybe some of the things you've had to adapt to meet the needs of that virtual environment. I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to share in the chat box. So have you felt like it's been really important or very difficult to have a teaming process? Have you had to implement different kinds of discipline procedures? And it does look like some chat is coming in.
Just in case you're not familiar with all the different features of Zoom, if you move your cursor around, you'll see some options pop up at the bottom and just click on chat and you can put your comments in there.
Okay, and so we've got a couple: teaching behavior for the unknown environments. Yeah, we're like really, sometimes we're not sure what behavior to provide instruction for if we can't actually see what's going on. The main element, and this is Wendy, the main element needing to work on rewards programs to motivate students to log in and complete work. And Wendy, I think I've heard that many times over the course of these webinars we've been doing, is that motivation is a key thing that we need to focus on and trying to provide some more instruction and address. Task completion again. Expectations are different, but teaming is essential. Working on reteaming and had meetings this morning to discuss our matrix and expectations. That's awesome, Kayla. Faculty commitment to teach and reward. I think that's a really great one, Brett, especially because we're just adjusting to this kind of new environment. So just even learning to teach in this environment was a barrier to being able to get some of those other pieces in. Rules and expectations. Very good. Thank you guys so much. And we'll have some other opportunities for you to talk in the chat. So I really appreciate you participating. And I am going to hand it over to Dama. She's going to take us through this next section.
All right, thanks, Betsy. And thank you guys for participating. It always makes us feel like we're not alone when we see your comments in the chat box and engagement. So we appreciate that. And we'll probably take a look at more of your comments if we didn't highlight them just now. So let's think about what it means to sustain. And just from purely the standpoint of sustaining as a definition, let's think about this and kind of unpack what it means. And it's to provide what's needed. It's to continue to give support, relief, or what's needed to prolong, to support as true and legal or just, to deal with or experience something that's good, bad, or something bad or unpleasant, like to sustain or, almost like to tolerate. Some synonyms would be to nourish or nurture. And then the opposite of that would be to dismiss, refuse, reject. So we just kind of wanted to prime our brains and start thinking through, what does it really mean to sustain and what are we thinking about? And then we'll take that to the next level of sustainability when it comes to our practices and those 10 critical elements of school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports. And to really think about what it takes to do that well. So thinking through the fidelity of implementation and what level of fidelity of implementation is required or necessary for you as a school team and as a school or a district to continue to get the outcomes that you're looking for. So there's positive outcomes that we're hoping to achieve through our implementation, and we are continuously monitoring our progress. And are we implementing things well? Are we implementing with fidelity? We've got measures that we'll refer to throughout our chat today, such as the benchmarks of quality, that help us as members of that school team to think through our practices and whether or not we're doing those practices well. But it's also important when we think about sustainability from the perspective of what does it take for us to continue to produce the valued outcomes that we're looking for, and what is that level of implementation and that level of fidelity and commitment that's required from us to ensure that we continue to get those valued outcomes. So we're going to move into a video that we think is really powerful. Some of you have likely seen it, and we'd like for you, as we play it, to think through sustainability now more than ever, because we have experienced some uncertainty within this second semester. The past couple of months have been different. And so this would be the time of year that normally or naturally we would be thinking about what worked this year, what do we need to do differently or improve upon, or what good things do we need to continue to sustain that next year. So it would be a natural time to think about sustainability, which is why it was fourth in our series. But now, in light of all of the uncertainty and things that have happened in the past couple of months, we're starting to think about it kind of from a two-pronged approach. So when we have these periods of remote learning or distance learning, how do we sustain that same level of implementation and continue to get the outcomes we're looking for? So I encourage you, as you watch this video, especially if you've seen it before, think about it through this new lens of sustainability, even during uncertain times and into next year. So we'll watch this quick video.
Research project funded by the Institute of Education Sciences of the U.S. Department of Education. We were looking at what educators at the school, district, and state can do to sustain evidence-based practices like PBIS. We were lucky to get information from individuals in 860 schools and follow them for 5 years to see what really made a difference in terms of sustaining or abandoning PBIS. So I want to share with you really quickly 4 tips that our research identified as most important to sustaining PBIS, and then 4 checks to see if you're on the right track. Number 1, keep a strong team. You know, one superhero educator might be able to get PBIS in place for a school, but one superhero cannot sustain it. You got to implement as a team, share the load, and keep things alive, especially when people move on from the positions they're in right now. So here's a check to see if you've got this in place. Think about your school right now. Is there one person that if they left, maybe even you, the systems might disappear? If so, you got to make a plan right now to get that person to share their knowledge and share their tasks across the whole team, as opposed to just relying on one person. Also, keep bringing new people onto the team, especially people who are new to your building. New people bring fresh ideas. Number 2, use your fidelity of implementation data to improve your systems. Measure fidelity at least once a year, and preferably a few times throughout the year so you can keep checking on that progress. Remember, the goal isn't to get 100% on these measures. The goal is to find out what can be improved, so you can make sure that you're implementing the critical features that are most likely to improve student outcomes. So here's another check for this one. You should always know what your next step in implementation is on your action plan. If all you know what your score was, you don't know what to do to keep improving. Number 3, use your school discipline data. There's a big difference between simply collecting your data and then actually using it actively for decision making. You can use your information to identify patterns of negative interactions in your school and change the environment to help students be successful in that specific area where you're having difficulties. So here's another check. When was the last time you shared your school discipline data with all staff in your school, like at a staff meeting? Our research found that schools that shared discipline data with all staff at least monthly were more likely to sustain PBIS than others that didn't, even if the team was doing a really good job with using data for decision making. And then the last one, implement PBIS in the classroom. Our research showed that the strongest predictor of both sustained implementation and sustained improved student outcomes was implementation of classroom PBIS systems. So here's your final check. Think about how much of the school day your students spend in the classroom. If your school does a great job with PBIS in common areas, like the hallways and the cafeteria, but you don't work together to implement PBIS classroom systems, your students are not going to a PBIS school. So to sum up, if you want to keep PBIS going strong in your building, your best bets are to keep a strong team, collect and use your fidelity data, use your school discipline data to improve your systems, and implement in the classroom. Thanks so much to the teachers and administrators who made this research happen and are working every day to improve outcomes for students.
All right. Thank you for watching that along with us, and some great reminders. And that's really what we want to frame our chat today around, using those key factors to help you with your PBIS sustainability. So I'm going to talk a little bit about keeping a strong team, but let's think big picture here. Keep a strong team was one of the 4. Use your school discipline data, use your fidelity of implementation data to improve your systems, and implement PBIS in the classroom. So we're going to unpack all 4 of those with some tips and resources and suggestions, and get some input from you as well. So when it comes to keeping a strong team, let's think about what some of those key components are, and that is going to be the team membership. And so we have this form that you're likely familiar with, and if not, all of the things that we show you are available on our website, and we've got links to those resources as well. So think about your team roster. Who's on your team? When do you meet? How often do you meet? How long do you meet? Are meetings sometimes postponed or skipped or changed? So if some of those things are happening, those are just areas to really think about the strength of your team, and really go back and look at the team roster and think about, are all of the right folks actively engaged and actively participating in team meetings? Do you have clearly identified roles and responsibilities? And are there any, let's say, responsibilities or roles that are missing? So you may find that when you get together, there seems to be a missing piece, or there's an action item that someone is always needing to follow up on, perhaps between meetings. It might be that the missing link is a person that may represent certain responsibilities or decisions. Maybe it's your data person that is really good at pulling data and helping lead the team through analyzing and problem solving using data. So there are often places that you can find out what is making our team less strong. Is it the folks that are there or the folks that are missing? Is it not having clearly identified roles and responsibilities? Is it perhaps that we have roles and responsibilities and they're clearly outlined, but maybe folks are not doing their part in between meetings? Those are, I don't want to say easy, like they're easy to do, but maybe simple, not easy. So perhaps if you're finding that folks are not maybe remembering to do their part, just readdressing roles and responsibilities as an agenda item can sometimes help just address that issue and help someone realize they might have forgotten a part that is very important that they're supposed to be doing. And we also have a team meeting checklist. These are small, so we know you probably can't read all of the words, but just to give you an idea of some of the resources you could find on our website and our live binder to really help you think through the strength of your team and the roles and responsibilities of folks on your team, and use that meeting checklist to really do a little bit of a maybe self-reflection or self-evaluation on how well your meetings are running. And the link to those resources, I think, will pop up at the bottom. Yeah. So when you access these handouts, if you click on that, you'll be able to go directly to the live binder and get the full version of each of those documents if you find that they would be helpful as you revisit the strength of your PBIS team. Now let's think through the meeting agendas, minutes, problem-solving focus. And so if you think about the agenda items, there are typically some standing agenda items that are going to take place, and maybe the meat or the content within the standing agenda item might change, but it's important to make sure that the things your team really needs to focus on around school-wide practices are on the agenda. They are being addressed. Maybe even need to put some time constraints around that. So you may find that certain parts of the agenda are taking longer, and maybe you're not able to get into an agenda item that's important, like looking at your data and using that to problem solve for the upcoming month or in between meetings. So these are some resources we have that can help you help set the agenda for starters. So if you see the agenda items and you like them, you can tweak them, update them, revise them. But also some reminders within that template. In the notes section, you'll see problem identification, problem analysis, the plan development and implementation and plan evaluation. Those are all reminders to really utilize the problem solving process in your monthly meetings, because with a good solid agenda, sticking to the agenda and the agenda items, bringing the appropriate resources to follow the agenda, resources being perhaps your tier 1 data, the breakdown of where problem behaviors are occurring on your campus, but then being able to use that data and use that action plan, or use that problem solving process to drive your action planning items. And then along with the action planning items, making sure that you're clearly agreeing on, again, the roles and responsibilities of who is going to take lead on certain things. So perhaps there are some action items that need to take place between meetings. If you've got a solid agenda, someone's taking notes using a pretty standard format for note taking, applying that problem solving process, using an action planning type template or document to capture the plans and the work that needs to be done within that action plan, clearly identifying names of people who will complete each action item, due dates as needed, a place to update, and then keeping all of these things in some sort of shared file, whatever your system is within your team. You might have shared documents through a school portal, a Google Drive, But wherever you can keep these items updated so folks can refer back and look and be reminded of what needs to be done in between, maybe jog their memory on some things that were discussed during the meeting. And another area that sometimes you can help to organize if you find that things aren't getting done is whoever is your note taker and kind of responsible for keeping these things up to date and posted on that shared space, perhaps could even throw in some Outlook calendar or Gmail calendar invitations to remind folks that, you know, we've got an upcoming meeting. So make sure that everyone's invited to the meeting, the date, the time, the location is set. You can upload the agenda or the action plan right into that meeting invitation, and then maybe even plug in some reminders to folks. So if you know the meeting, let's say, is next Wednesday morning, then perhaps we've got reminders that are popping up on Friday or Monday morning for folks to go back and make sure that they've done their part and they're prepared for the upcoming meeting. So just some pointers and things that we've seen work well around keeping a strong team, and we welcome you to click on the link to the live binder and use our resources as you think about your current team and perhaps changes that you want to make moving into next year and things you might need to think about. So now we're going to show you just a brief clip. This is actually a 15-minute exemplary, I guess, if you will, tier 1 meeting that you can find. It's from the National Center on PBIS website, and they have tons of resources there as well. But we're just going to show you a few minutes to give you an idea if you want to go back later and look through the components of a really well-run meeting with a strong team.
Are you guys able to see the YouTube video?
Yes, Dama, or Betsy, we can.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Didn't want to play half of it and then realize you couldn't see it. All right, I'm going to start a little bit into it. There we go.
So much for being on time. You guys are just awesome with that. And today is really cool. The Parent Council has nominated Nad Sampson to be our parent rep. And so she's going to be joining us on the Tier 1 teams. And that provides us with an opportunity to kind of review our team purpose and our agreements, our decision guidelines of how we run business. And we do that for every one of our teams in our school, which is pretty neat. So Katie, how about you go over that with her?
Sure.
With us.
So we try to keep everything posted so that we can refer back to it. We have our team agreements, respectful, relevance, and reality. We also have different roles on our team, and we make sure that each role has a primary and a backup, just in case. Let's see, we always start with the previous meeting minutes, and then as we meet, Erin revises and adjusts those, and the next day she'll send those out. We always make sure that within the first 5 minutes that we are looking at data to make sure that that drives the rest of our meeting minutes. We also occasionally need to take our agenda items and rearrange a little bit if Rhonda needs to step out or has a schedule change. Great, thanks.
How's your schedule today?
It's good. I should be able to attend the whole time.
Right.
Yeah.
All righty. Okay, so we are going to review our bus problem. We've had a bus issue with physical aggression that we've been working on as a school, Nad, so we'll catch you up on that and see how we've done. We also have defiance in classrooms that we've been working on and had met our goal, so we'll get a status report on that. And it's also time to look at our universal benchmark data for the reading and math, so that'll be exciting. And then we also always end with our organizational and housekeeping items. The agenda is here, so if anybody needs to refer to it during the meeting, it's at the top of the meeting minutes here for us to refer to.
All right, so you get the idea there that it really shows a meeting taking place, kind of a sample of an exemplary team meeting, but then I love how they have like the roles above the folks, so you can kind of see like who are these people and what types of information or stakeholders do they represent? What might they bring to the table? And then the snippet of the agenda so you can see what the plan is there. And you may find sometimes meetings run too long or they're not long enough. You don't get through all the agenda items. Those are things that you as a team can come to consensus on and discuss. If you need to meet more frequently, but shorter meetings, or longer meetings and less frequently, it's really up to you as far as what's most functional for your team. And then as you're doing that self-reflection, if you haven't done so already, when you're going through those end of year evaluation items, the benchmarks of quality has items related to your PBIS team. And then also the tiered fidelity inventory addresses the functioning of your team. So a couple of great places for you to do some reflection. And if you're not scoring or not meeting the standard that you hoped, then you can see in the rubric or the scoring guides what types of things you might need to do to improve the functionality of your team. So let's just kind of think about general considerations. We won't take the time now, but if you want to jot down some things that you might be thinking of that you want to talk with your team about, but think about what did the data say about your team this year, or what will it say as you go through those end of year items. Just thinking anecdotally about staff turnover or staff changes, administrative support. Does everybody really have a clear idea of what the mission and purpose of those team meetings are, or has it started to like fade into other types of purposes? Do you meet regularly? Do you have agendas and action plans? And maybe some of the things you saw today will be good reminders of areas that need some improvement. And then thinking through the past couple of months, as we scrambled to kind of learn a new way of work and get things ready for our students and try to help them adjust and navigate to a new and different way of learning, it's important that you make sure as a team you are using technology, using Zoom or Teams or different ways that you can meet so that you can continue that good work. And you may have to meet more frequently up front. So I know like with our team, we used to meet monthly and now we meet weekly just to stay on top of things because things change so often when times are uncertain. So just making sure you take those things into consideration and continue the strength of your team.
Okay, thank you, Dima. That was an awesome quick tip on how to strengthen teams. The second tip in that 4-tip series about sustainability was using your fidelity of implementation data. So that fidelity of implementation asks the question, how well are we doing the things that we set out to do? So in regards to PBIS, that would be, how many of those critical elements were we able to implement well? And we can get a sense of the answer to that question by looking at how we rated ourselves on some of those instruments that Dama was just referring to, like the benchmarks of quality and our PBIS implementation checklist. And we can also look at our outcomes. So our outcomes that we typically look at in the PBS evaluation system refer to discipline referrals. So did we have a reduction in our discipline referrals? Were our discipline referrals more equitable across, race and ethnicity, special education status? Did our climate data suggest that we have teachers and students and staff that like being here? So those are all important questions that can tell us about whether or not we're able to do the things that we set out to do. And along the same lines, do we have the buy-in from staff to get that level of fidelity that we need to successfully implement? So I know this year we've been more challenged in how we identify fidelity because we've had this shift and may feel as though we've had to kind of shut down what we do for PBIS. But I would encourage you to think about it a little differently. Sometimes we, in parallel to this, sometimes toward the end of the year, we might hear schools saying, well, we're not doing PBIS right now because we're doing testing. And while I understand that testing brings about that high stress level, in actuality, implementing the framework is going to help things run more smoothly, right? It's going to help things be more efficient. So it's actually a tool that we can use in these times where things start to rev up and feel more stressful. The more disruption we have to what is normal and routine for kids, the greater the need to set up those straightforward, consistent systems of expectations and rules. And this is going to be especially important when we go back to school, and we have to then focus on some of these extra precautions that kids aren't used to, and they may not understand yet. So we can have the most elaborate, awesome, Pinterest-worthy implementation plan, but if the people who are charged with implementing don't understand it, and they don't believe in it, it's going to just end up in that dusty box behind the stage on the auditorium. So the most important thing that we need really is an understanding of how our staff feels about what's going on, and that levels of discontent and resistance and issues of implementation are addressed. And so it begs the question, do we understand or do we know what our staff's beliefs are? So you'll see here a sample survey. This is just a very kind of basic survey that a school could use to identify some of those staff beliefs or some of the things that staff feel are most problematic on campus. So you could create this kind of survey online through something like SurveyMonkey or paper pencil survey. There are advantages and disadvantages to both of those kinds of strategies. Paper survey, it's going to be easier for you to distribute at a faculty meeting if we're on campus. And then you could use it as an exit ticket that people turn in at the end, so you get lots of responses back. But then you have to have somebody enter all that data in, which can kind of be a pain. So you want to think about maybe a middle ground, like having your faculty meeting for that instance in the computer lab, or having people bring laptops to the meeting and completing it at the meeting. Just some ideas. You could always shoot it out through an email or some other method. But the idea here is that we're making sure that we are checking on what the perception is of PBIS and how people feel about the discipline process, and how people are feeling in general at the end of the day. All those things are really important in terms of buy-in. And one more point I want to make on this slide is that if we're collecting this data as a PBIS team, you also want to make sure that you're sharing back those results with your school staff that completed it. That's really for any piece of data that you may have them complete. So what you see here is an example of an online belief survey that we, the Florida PBIS project, have created. This can be sent out to staff, and it generates this pretty report that you see. And it's on a number of topics. So it's about behavior, discipline, social emotional learning. And if you can view it on our website, just go in and search for the survey in that middle space on our front page. Or you can also contact your district coordinator if you think your school might be interested in using something like this. So here is an illustration of what you see when you log into our PBIS evaluation system. This is on our Florida PBIS page, and if you're a Florida district school who is trained in PBIS, you have access to that system, and this is where you would enter your benchmarks of quality data, your PIC data, PBIS implementation checklist data. So if you've gone in and you've put that data in, you can have access to this really awesome report. And it asks the question at the top, are you implementing PBIS with Fidelity? So if you look at the right-hand side in the middle where it says BOQ critical element score, that actually tells you which of the 10 critical elements are strengths for you and which may be things that you need to work on more. So that dotted line is kind of the threshold for implementation fidelity. So anything below that dotted line would be considered something you might want to work on. Above it would be things that you perceive your school as doing really well. And so if you've entered your outcome data into that system, Your outcome data would have been your discipline referrals, office discipline referrals, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, and then we also have equity reports, which break that down by race, ethnicity, and special education status. You have access to a report that looks like this. And what you see at the top here in this shaded box is a graph, and this was a school that's completed lots of data, although this is kind of old, but it is the kind of data that as a TA person I love to see, because what it's showing is that the benchmarks of quality overall has grown increasingly, meaning the school feels like their fidelity is really good. That's that orange dot. And then the blue squares are the referral rates. So I'm going to see a nice spread between the BOQ and the referral rates, with the referral rates being really low and the BOQ being really high. And that tells us we are implementing with pretty good fidelity, or it can point to that. So you'd ask the question, what kinds of trends do you see in your discipline data? Is this data going in the down direction for the blue squares, or is it going in the up direction? And not only asking that question, but really diving into the why. And this next graph that you see can help you determine your plan for next year in terms of whether or not we're seeing a decrease in different kinds of referrals. So if your out-of-school suspensions have gone down, but your in-school suspensions are tripling, then you may just be replacing one form of seclusionary discipline for another form. And so that's not great in terms of implementation. And you're also going to want to look at who is getting referrals to make sure that your risk of getting a referral isn't disproportionately higher for any particular group of students. And just to illustrate the importance of this, in that graph above with the green, yellow, and orange boxes, if you are a Black African-American student at this particular school, you're more than twice as likely to receive that outcome of suspension. So that is a hard conversation to have, but a really important one. So talk about it, plan around it, work to make it better. So just to sum up, gather the discipline data you have from this year, even if it ended in March. So we weren't in the building after March, so we really shouldn't have too many referrals. You may, but they should have gone down significantly. If your data aren't in PBIS, it's not too late to enter them in, and then you get to look at these cool reports that I just showed you. And if you aren't a Florida PBIS school, you can use your district system to retrieve similar kinds of data, maybe not as cool, but still similar reports. And that data hopefully can be broken down by race, ethnicity, and ESE status, so you can see what's going on and what needs work. So some considerations for remote learning in terms of discipline data. We're going to want to gather as much information as we can about what's happened during these past 3 months. Oh, it feels like 7,000 months, but it's only been 3 months. We're going to want to look at what's happened. What have people been experiencing? Because those kinds of data, that experience is going to help to shape what we put into place in terms of PBIS for next year. So consider some questions that might be helpful, like what issues have been most problematic for teachers and students during this remote learning time, especially those issues that could have carryover into next year. So thinking about things like absences, students that have had a lot of absences during this remote time. We probably have seen a great number of absences just from kids forgetting to click on the attendance button. But we're going to want to, weed out, if we can, those absences from the ones that are truly not attending. So we could look at things like work completion and grades to identify who was really who was just checked out, because those are kids that are probably going to need a lot more support come fall. And what additional data can we gather to help us to know what problems kids have experienced? We also have a webinar on this topic that you can link to, which is situationally inappropriate behaviors and how to respond to those. And it dives into some of the skills and strategies that we can use to help support some of these behaviors. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Dama.
All right, so the fourth thing that we heard from the video earlier was the fourth point, or the fourth key to sustainability, is around implementing PBIS in the classroom. And there were some really powerful things that were stated during that portion of the video. So even though you've probably seen it a couple of times, I feel like it's one of those that I go back and watch and listen to and try to get some of those key points and really unpack them. Because one of the things that he talked about is to get the sustained improvement and the sustained PBIS practices, it's essential that we implement PBIS well in the classroom. And if it's not getting down to that student level in the classroom, then, and just kind of loosely paraphrasing, then students are not benefiting or not attending a PBIS school. So we have to think about what does that look like and what are those essential practices for classroom PBIS. We have lots of resources around what we refer to as the 5 essentials. And this is just going to be kind of a brief overview of those 5 areas. And then we'll also direct you to some recent adaptations that we've created based on the changes that have happened in the past couple of months. But let's just think about these 5 essential practices for a moment and unpack them just briefly. So one of those is to maximize structure in the classroom. So this is all about having predictable routines, creating that environment where there's safe, orderly instruction taking place, there's adequate supervision, seating arrangements, how we group students, all of those things that really ensure structure and predictability in the classroom. Teaching the expectations, jumping ahead, but teaching, monitoring, and reinforcing expectations and rules, and making sure that they're aligned directly to those school-wide expectations. So just like having school-wide expectations posted around your campus, if they're never taught or referred to, students aren't acknowledged for doing those expectations in any way, then they're not all that effective. They're just posters. Same in the classroom. If those classroom rules and expectations, or excuse me, rules and procedures are not directly aligned to the school-wide expectations, then we create confusion and students may feel like there's too many different things that are not really aligned, and it might get confusing and really not be an opportunity for them to learn exactly what's expected of them in that classroom environment. So now the one I skipped is about actively engaging students by providing culturally responsive instruction. That includes high rates of opportunities to respond. So it's another one of those 5 essentials of classroom PBIS, and making sure that we're linking active engagement to outcomes, that we want students to be actively engaged in the learning process. Also, we have lots of, as I go through these things briefly, each of the 5 essentials, there are lots of different examples and resources. We have videos that accompany them. If you have not visited this area of our website, then I definitely encourage you to do so. And then the last 2 look similar, but they're slightly different. Use a continuum of culturally responsive strategies to acknowledge appropriate behavior. And so that is really making sure that in the classroom that teachers are really acknowledging appropriate behaviors. So if there's a high level of structure, if the routines are predictable, if there's quality instruction taking place where students are actively engaged and having lots of opportunities to respond with the learning environment, they're taught those expectations, then this naturally leads us to what is that continuum to ensure that we're acknowledging when students meet those expectations and demonstrate the appropriate behavior. And then the last one is using the continuum of culturally responsive strategies to respond to situationally inappropriate behavior. So do we have a continuum of responses to inappropriate behavior that go from like the least intensive or least intrusive types of responses to the most intensive types of responses. So that could go from, planned ignoring, differential reinforcement, lots of different strategies. And again, as you get into those 5 essentials, we have many resources that can be shared that you, if you're a classroom teacher, might appreciate some of those resources. Or if you're in more of a coaching role, you might want to share these with your classroom teachers and use the resources to ensure that PBIS is taking place in the classroom. A couple of things to think about here. The strongest predictor of both sustained implementation and sustained improved student outcomes was implementation of classroom PBIS systems. And that was the quote that I kind of loosely said a moment ago. So let's think about, what does the Fidelity data say about your implementation this year? And looking at classroom systems, is your team looking at classroom data? So are you looking at those classroom systems items from the benchmarks of quality and from the tiered Fidelity inventory? If you have already done those instruments, you can go back and look at what did those measures say about your fidelity in the classroom. And if not, take particular note of your answers to those areas, because remember, that's one of the 4 keys to sustaining PBIS. And so if you think about the 5 essentials of PBIS in the classroom, and you kind of move around this wheel and think about the maximizing structure, having those expectations and rules, student engagement, acknowledging appropriate behavior, responding to situationally inappropriate behavior, are those 5 essentials in place in the majority of your classrooms now? And you may be thinking, well, I don't know, Dama, because we're not in classrooms right now. So let's think about, how are they different during times of remote learning or distance learning? And we quickly, as a project, got together and created some resources, some weekly chats. Each week, what we did is unpacked the 5 essentials. So we did kind of an overview focused for families, because now families are starting to learn more and get more involved in leading and facilitating learning from home. And then we also did the same series for educators. And so after the overview, we did like a deeper dive into each of those 5 essentials. So if you do want more information related to the strategies in general, related to the 5 essentials, we have lots of resources. Like I said, you could get lost in our website just looking at each of the resources that are available to support the 5 essentials. And then if you want to catch up with some of the deeper dive chats that we did in the past couple of months, that's what the visual there is to the right on your screen. Each of those are chats that you can click on. There are PowerPoints and tip sheets and handouts and recorded chats that you can go back and watch or share with others that really unpack each of the 5 essentials and go in more depth. And again, one is for the families and one is for educators. That way you can share those with folks as appropriate. So let's think about those lessons learned from the pandemic. And as we started thinking through a few things, it could be slide after slide of things that we've learned, but we really wanted to think through some of the lessons learned and things that we heard from the districts that we support, from the schools that we interact with, around teaching and the critical importance of front-loading teaching expectations and rules. So we know at the beginning of the school year, we're usually all in agreement that we need to spend time teaching rules and expectations and procedures. And then usually after maybe a break, maybe winter break, we do some booster type training with our students. And we really kind of do those little reminders, when we get back to school in January, or maybe before and after spring break. So those are things that we've always known were important. But what happens when you suddenly send everyone home and start to engage in distance learning? It's critically important to teach those expectations and rules, to adapt them for those home learning environments. And that requires some out-of-the-box thinking. And we saw some really amazing examples. If any of you have examples you want to share, I know you appreciate hearing from each other, so feel free to throw anything in the chat box related to things that you learned. And but definitely, if it's not something that you've taken the time to be intentional about yet, you might want to get together with your fellow teachers, or if you're a member of that PBIS team, get together with your team and think about how you could really create a professional learning community around adapting the teaching of your expectations and rules for distance learning. Also, we've learned and the need and importance of being trauma informed, being trauma aware, and social emotional wellness and well-being are very important. And those, again, were things that some folks had a lot of expertise and would remind us on campuses of the importance of being aware and teaching social emotional learning skills and looking at mental well-being. But now everyone's been impacted at varying levels, and the different protective factors that we have really have played a huge role in how much each of us as adults and children have been impacted. But now a lesson learned from the pandemic is it's a big deal that we all must have trauma-informed practices. We must think about the mental well-being of our adults and students alike. And it's something that we can all relate to, even if that's at different levels. And then also identify tiered intervention support strategies early on and be ready with materials, personnel, progress monitoring procedures. So some of us were scrambling to pull these things together because we never imagined something like this would happen. But now, when you have some time to think about lessons learned and think about what went well and what you're still maybe working on, is the importance of identifying how do we continue to provide those supports to students, during times of distance learning, and how do we continue to provide the interventions that they need and monitor progress, and what does that look like when the entire environment changes. So now in the chat box, what are some lessons or strategies that you have learned about providing behavioral support while working within the virtual environment? I'll give you a second. If you haven't, I'm going to pull up the chat box and see if you're already putting some things in there, but let us know some things that you've learned, even if it's an example of something that I've already mentioned, or maybe something that you did right away that was helpful. While you're thinking and typing, I will share, recently a colleague and I did the last deeper dive was on responding to inappropriate behavior. And we talked about ways to adapt just the school-wide expectations and add in what that looks like in a virtual learning environment. So I see staying in communication with the teachers, being flexible with scheduling support, the importance of virtual home visits to check on students. I love that. In some ways, that probably made it a little easier to check in and do kind of a virtual home visit when maybe otherwise you might not have physically been able to check in. I've also heard folks say things about those virtual check-ins. It makes you think of ways that you need to be creative on your check-ins. Providing PBIS behavior for families on our district school Facebook page. I love that. I think it's really forced us to think outside the box when it comes to bringing families into our PBIS community. Love that. I see, again, virtual home visits, the importance of the relationship, weekly check-in and check-out, resources for students and parents on SEL. These are fantastic. In English, Spanish, and American Sign Language, spot on. I mean, we have to be able to communicate in the languages that our families and students can respond to, even more so when we're not physically together, ensuring our communication is readable.
I had a thought too. Yeah. This is Betsy. Sometimes you may be checking in on students and not getting a response, particularly like middle school, high school students. And I wouldn't immediately think that they're just checked out or that they're not paying attention. They may not, respond, but just the fact that they got that email lets them know that somebody is still interested and concerned about them. So I wouldn't be disappointed if they don't respond. Know that it's probably still reaching some of them, even if they don't reply back.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I know it's been interesting phone calling. Sometimes we worry about folks having our phone numbers, and then we get in these situations where you're forced to kind of think about different ways to communicate. If our families and students don't have access to email or the internet. So that I know has been somewhat of a struggle, but it's been great to see the ways that teachers have been reaching out and doing those phone calls to check in. See here, encourage student voice on how we can help, show empathy. Definitely. Thank you guys for all of those great ideas. And hopefully if you didn't have a chance to comment, you're getting some good ideas from what's being shared. I find almost everyone has Facebook. So true. I mean, if you think about the different ways that we can reach out, we can be creative. We're not going to reach everyone, but if there are a couple of ways that you can reach most, then you're really just having to do those follow-ups with a few people. So we want to leave you with something that we also created a handout on, and it's just some things to do for your summer planning. Use your data for planning. So I know we threw a lot of different things out there, even though we tried to focus in on just 4 things. It's just so much information, and it's kind of like saying, just do everything and do it really well. But think about your PBIS Fidelity. So use those instruments like the benchmarks of quality to really look at what's working well and what areas need improvement. Examine your PBIS outcomes. So are you getting the outcomes that you expect to see? So if you are doing PBIS with Fidelity, we expect certain outcomes. Are you getting that? Is there a match there? Review everything as a PBIS team. Collaborate with your stakeholders. And I know that was even mentioned in the chat box. I mean, just getting some input. So collaborate with your stakeholders, create and modify your PBIS implementation plan, and identify implementation needs. And we are going to have lots of different creative ways for training this summer. So as you do these items, you examine your data, you meet with your team, you think about areas that need improvement. Just know that as a project, we have a point person within each district. We call that person our district coordinator. So if you're not sure who that is, you can always, try to find out in your district or ask us and we can let you know. And that's usually our point of contact when it comes to providing like a booster training for teams that have already gone through our training, or for teams that need a retraining or are brand new to PBIS. Typically, those are face-to-face options, and we have created options where we can walk school teams through the material using virtual platforms, and your district coordinator will work with someone like Betsy and I who support the district to provide those trainings that meet your needs. So I would encourage you to reach out to your district coordinator if you have any training needs for your school, or if any of this, really highlighted something that you're struggling with, then we definitely will provide support and work with your district coordinator to provide training to help you guys sustain your good work and think about what that's going to look like moving into next school year. And if there is any feedback that you would like to share, feel free to leave that in the chat box. It is challenging that we can't all be together and talk together and kind of like read the audience and know what you need from us. So feel free to put some things in the chat box, comment on anything that you liked or want more of, or anything that you need that we didn't cover, or questions that you might have. And everything will be recorded from today as well. So you can always, if you want to go back and listen to something, then definitely you can do that, or share it with others. And make sure to answer the question, how helpful was today's chat? Be honest. We like good, honest feedback so that we can use that data from you. And once folks have a chance to do that, we'll end with just our contact information. And if you have questions, we will take a minute to kind of scroll through and look in the chat box. So if we didn't get to answer your question in a timely manner, we'll try to make sure that we do that. And we appreciate you guys for joining us today and wish you the best of luck in sustaining PBIS.
And thank you for the great feedback in the chat.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Have a great day.